The Night Watcher. The ancient iron gates of Ravencrest Cemetery groaned in protest as Marcus Wallace pushed them open, the sound echoing through the misty October evening. After 15 years of working as a graveyard keeper, he thought he'd grown accustomed to the peculiar solitude that came with the job. But tonight felt different. The air was heavier, charged with an electricity that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. Marcus pulled his worn leather jacket tighter around his shoulders as he made his way down the winding cobblestone path toward the cemetery's Victorian-era keeper's cottage. The structure had stood sentinel over these grounds since 1873, its weathered stone walls holding secrets that stretched back generations. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon, shadows began to dance between the headstones like restless spirits. The job hadn't been his first choice. Who dreams of spending their nights among the dead? But after his wife Sarah's passing 5 years ago, the position felt oddly fitting. Perhaps that's why old Mr. Henderson had chosen him as his successor. The cemetery chooses its keeper, the elderly man had said cryptically before disappearing one stormy night, leaving nothing but a ring of ancient keys and a leather-bound journal filled with bizarre warnings and rules. Rule #1. Never leave the gates unlocked after sunset. Rule #2. Always check the eastern section 3 times before midnight. Rule #3. If you hear singing from the old mausoleum, do not, under any circumstances, answer. Marcus had dismissed these rules as the ramblings of a superstitious old man. That was, until the night everything changed. It began with the sounds. Soft at first, barely distinguishable from the whisper of wind through the cypress trees. A gentle humming that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Marcus had been making his usual rounds, checking the perimeter as he'd done countless times before, when he noticed something odd about the Blackwood family crypt. The heavy iron door, which he distinctly remembered locking that morning, stood slightly ajar. As he approached, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, the humming grew louder. It reminded him of an old lullaby, the kind mothers sing to their children on stormy nights. But there was something wrong about it, something that made his skin crawl. The notes were slightly off-key, as if sung by a throat that hadn't drawn breath in years. "Hello?" Marcus called out, his voice steady despite the fear creeping up his spine. "This area is closed after dark." The humming stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so absolute it seemed to swallow even the ambient sounds of the night. Then came the whisper, so close it could have been spoken directly into his ear. "You're not supposed to answer, Keeper Wallace." Marcus spun around, heart thundering in his chest, but found only empty air. When he turned back to the crypt, the door was firmly closed and locked, as if it had never been opened at all. That should have been the end of it. He should have walked away, returned to his cottage, and drowned the memory in a glass of whiskey. But curiosity had always been his weakness. That night, he pulled out Henderson's journal, studying its pages with new eyes. Between the rambling warnings and cryptic symbols, a pattern emerged. Every 25 years, on the night of the autumn equinox, something stirred in Ravencrest Cemetery. Something that tested the boundaries between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The last occurrence had been in 1998, the night Henderson disappeared. And tomorrow night would mark exactly 25 years since then. As Marcus delved deeper into the journal, he discovered entries dating back to 1873, each written by a different keeper. They all described the same phenomena: the singing, the whispers, the doors that opened and closed of their own accord. But it was the final pages of Henderson's entries that chilled him to the bone. They're not content to rest anymore. The barrier grows thinner with each cycle. The songs are getting louder, and they remember. God help me, they remember their names now. If you're reading this, my successor, know that we're not just keepers of the grounds. We're... The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Marcus spent hours checking every lock, reinforcing every gate, and drawing the strange symbols Henderson had meticulously documented. As twilight approached, He could feel the change in the air, like the pressure before a massive storm. The first sign came at sunset. All the birds suddenly took flight, leaving the cemetery in eerie silence. Then the temperature dropped sharply, his breath forming clouds in the suddenly frigid air. And finally, the singing began. It wasn't coming from the mausoleum this time. It seemed to emanate from every corner of the cemetery at once, a chorus of otherworldly voices singing in languages long forgotten. Marcus retreated to his cottage, but the voices followed, growing louder with each passing hour. At midnight, the ground began to tremble. Through his window, Marcus watched in horror as thin ribbons of phosphorescent light began to seep from the earth around the graves. The light twisted and coalesced into vaguely human shapes, but wrong somehow, too tall, too fluid in their movements. A knock at his door made him jump. It was gentle, almost polite. "Keeper Wallace," a voice called. Familiar, yet impossible. "Won't you join us? Sarah misses you terribly." His heart stopped. That voice, he would know it anywhere. The same voice that had laughed with him on their wedding day, that had whispered, "I love you every night for 20 years. Sarah's voice. Marcus pressed his hands against his ears, but the voice continued, now seeming to come from inside his own head. "It's so lonely here, Marcus. We need a new keeper on this side. Mr. Henderson has served his time." The door began to rattle in its frame, the wood groaning under impossible pressure. Marcus scrambled for Henderson's journal, frantically flipping pages until he found what he needed. The final defense, written in shaking hand. Words of power passed down through generations of keepers. As the door splintered inward, Marcus began to recite the ancient words, his voice growing stronger with each syllable. The temperature plummeted further, frost crystallizing on the windows. The spectral lights outside his cottage writhed and twisted, and the singing turned to shrieks of fury. Sarah's voice changed too, becoming something ancient and terrible. "You can't keep us out forever, Keeper. The barrier grows weaker with each cycle. Soon, very soon, we'll all come home." Marcus continued the incantation, even as blood began to trickle from his nose and ears. The pressure in the room built to unbearable levels, and just when he thought his head would explode, everything stopped. The silence returned as suddenly as it had departed. The temperature began to rise, and the ghostly light sank back into the earth. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But everything had changed. Marcus understood now why the position of keeper was so important, why Henderson had chosen him. The dead didn't just need someone to tend their graves. They needed someone to ensure they stayed in them. As he walked the grounds that morning, checking for any lingering evidence of the night's events, Marcus found something that made his blood run cold. Near Sarah's grave, written in frost that hadn't yet melted, 25 years, my love. I can wait." Marcus returned to his cottage and began to write his own entry in Henderson's journal. Future keepers would need to be prepared. The barrier was indeed growing weaker, and the dead were getting stronger. But for now, at least, they remained at rest beneath the hallowed ground of Ravencrest Cemetery. He had 25 years to figure out a more permanent solution. 25 years to strengthen the defenses. 25 years until the dead would try again to breach the veil between their world and ours. But as Marcus looked out over the peaceful morning cemetery, he couldn't shake the feeling that next time, the ancient words might not be enough. Next time, the dead might finally find their way home. And somewhere, carried on the morning breeze, he could still hear the faintest whisper of singing. The end.
The Secret in the Old Watermill. On a stormy autumn night, Mia and Liam found themselves in the small, forgotten town of Willow's End. The journey had been unexpected. A detour off the main road after a mysterious roadblock led them to this eerie village. Thick fog covered the grounds, and the silence was broken only by the whispering winds that seemed to carry secrets long forgotten. Drawn by an unusual tale they had overheard in the nearby tavern, they decided to visit the old mill. The mill was abandoned years ago after strange occurrences, and none dare go there after nightfall. The bartender warned them with a shiver. But Mia's curiosity and Liam's adventurous spirit pushed them toward it. Legend said that the mill was haunted, cursed by its owner who vanished under unknown circumstances. As they reached the mill, it loomed before them. A structure so ancient that time itself seemed to have etched its mystery into its walls. Ivy grew thick around its stone foundation, and shattered windows gave it an air of desolation. They stepped inside cautiously, their flashlights revealing broken gears and dusty cobwebs. "Do you hear that?" Mia whispered, her breath clouding in the cool, stale air. A faint, rhythmic sound echoed through the empty building, like water dripping, but with a strange cadence that made the hair on their arms stand up. "What if there's something or someone still here?" Liam murmured, half-jokingly, though his voice betrayed his own unease. As they explored deeper, a cold breeze rushed past, carrying an overwhelming scent of mildew mixed with something else, something darker. They moved towards the basement, where the source of the mysterious dripping seemed louder. The stairs creaked, almost warning them to turn back, but they pressed on. Reaching the bottom, they found a door locked tight, its wood rotten but resilient. Liam forced it open, and a dark chamber greeted them, a room untouched by the outside world for decades. The flickering light revealed faint markings on the walls, symbols etched in a language neither of them could recognize. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them, and the rhythmic dripping sound stopped. The silence was oppressive. Then, a whisper. Soft at first, then louder, as if right next to them. The voice spoke in an ancient language, repeating a single word over and over. The whisper was close, almost brushing against Maya's ear. She froze, her flashlight trembling in her grip. The strange word repeated itself, each syllable resonating with an unnatural echo that seemed to seep into her bones. Liam, wide-eyed and rigid, turned to her, mouth slightly open, as though he wanted to speak but found himself paralyzed by the terror of the unknown. "Liam, did you hear that?" Mia's voice was barely a whisper. "Yeah," Liam stammered, swallowing hard. "What is that?" Before they could comprehend what was happening, the temperature plummeted, their breaths visible as cold fog in the beam of their flashlights. Shadows slithered across the walls, forming twisted, almost human shapes that seemed to sway in a hypnotic rhythm. The symbols on the walls began to glow, casting an eerie green light that intensified the unease clawing at their minds. Mia reached for Liam's hand, her fingers cold and clammy against his. "Maybe we should go back." "This was a bad idea." Liam nodded, but as he took a step towards the door, it was as if the entire room was watching, listening. A sense of dread washed over them, thickening the air. The door that they had come through was gone, vanished, as if it had never been there at all. Panic surged through Mia, her heart pounding like a drum. "Liam, where's the door? It was just there." I don't know. Maybe we got turned around?" But he didn't believe his own words. He scanned the walls, searching for an exit, but all he saw were the ancient symbols, now pulsating faintly like a heartbeat. The rhythmic dripping sound resumed, louder than before. It seemed to come from a dark corner, a spot so shrouded in shadows that even their flashlights couldn't pierce it. They approached slowly, compelled by a mix of fear and morbid curiosity. As they neared, something glinted from within the darkness. It was a small, rusted door barely visible behind the rotting beams of the mill. A chill settled over them as they opened it, revealing a narrow stone staircase spiraling downward into blackness. The dripping grew louder, now sounding disturbingly like footsteps echoing up from below. "Are we really going down there?" Mia whispered, her voice wavering. Liam gave her a determined look. I don't think we have a choice." With flashlights trembling, they began their descent, each step sinking them deeper into the suffocating darkness. The air grew colder and thicker, laced with the stench of decay. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a cavernous room, its walls adorned with more of the strange symbols and countless faded photographs. Mia pointed her flashlight at one of the photos, recoiling at the sight. It was an image of a family, mother, father, 2 young children, all staring directly at the camera with hollow, lifeless eyes. The dates scrawled beneath each photo revealed a chilling pattern. The families, all different, had vanished exactly 1 year apart. Liam, these people, they're all gone, Mia choked, her voice barely a whisper. As they continued down the line of photos, Mia's heart stopped when she saw the latest one, a photo of them, taken just outside the mill earlier that evening. Scrawled beneath was today's date. "This can't be real," Liam stammered, his face pale. Suddenly they heard shuffling, a faint yet growing sound of footsteps on the stairs above. They turned off their flashlights and huddled in the dark, holding their breaths as the footsteps grew louder. They caught glimpses of shadows moving in the faint green glow of the symbols. Whoever, or whatever, it wasn't human. The thing descended slowly, its gait irregular and jerky, like a puppet pulled on invisible strings. Mia felt bile rise in her throat as she watched, her mind racing with the urge to run but paralyzed with terror. It moved closer, revealing gaunt, decaying flesh stretched tightly across a skeletal frame, empty eye sockets that seemed to stare directly at them. It stopped, tilted its head, and let out a chilling whisper, echoing the same word they had heard earlier. "Leave, Dot." The walls began to close in, twisting and shifting as if the entire mill were alive, reacting to their fear. Mia grabbed Liam's hand, and they bolted, racing back up the staircase with the creature's rattling breath close behind them. Reaching the main floor, they found the door miraculously reappeared, though the mill was barely recognizable. Walls distorted, floors cracked, and the symbols blazing bright, as if they were alive. The creature shrieked from below, its voice filled with anguish and rage, and with one last effort, they threw themselves out of the mill into the cold night. Outside, the air was still and silent. The mill stood as it always had, seemingly untouched. But as they turned back to look, they saw something in the window, a figure watching them with empty, hollow eyes. The old watermill and its ominous, relentless secrets faded into the mist as Mia and Liam stumbled back to their car. But the whispers followed them, a dark reminder that some places were best left undisturbed.